Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of All Nighter Discussions. It's your host, Gabe Tice, and we are in part two of our Evil Dead trilogy retrospective. Last time we talked about the first Evil Dead, the iconic, immortal Evil Dead, and now we're talking about a movie that perhaps, I don't want to say surpasses, but could be the crowning jewel of Sam Raimi's career in a lot of people's eyes. All right, that's Evil Dead 2. I'm once again joined by President CM.
What's going on, everybody in All Nighter Nation?
And gosh, this is one of the most widely talked about movies in horror fandom. It's been a cult favorite for many, many years, many decades, right? We're coming up on year 40 for the Evil Dead franchise.
Very hard to believe that it's reached that point already.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost twice as old as we are. But I do think that this will be a different type of discussion than you usually hear about Evil Dead 2. So there's a little preview, right? That's your hook, audience. You can't leave now. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. But first, President CM, have you ever seen or even just heard of Sam Raimi's movie Crime Wave that he did before this?
It's interesting because when I talk movies with people, I'm used to being the one who's mentioning the weird movies that nobody's ever seen or heard of. But in this case, this is where I am going to be learning some things because I have never even heard of this movie.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm not surprised at all, by the way. But so this is important context. Crime Wave is important context for Evil Dead 2. So I wanted to talk briefly about it because I think it really informs the kind of mindset and approach that Sam Raimi took with Evil Dead 2 versus Evil Dead 1. So Evil Dead 1 comes out, it's a huge success. It does well in theaters and does even better on home video. Sam Raimi is kind of, a wunderkind, however you pronounce that. He's the golden boy. So he's trying to figure out his next movie. And lo and behold, he works with the Coen brothers, of all people. But one of them, I think Joel Coen, had been an assistant editor on the first Evil Dead. So that's how they knew each other. The Coen brothers wrote him a screenplay called The XYZ Murders, and it would be retitled Crime Wave. Without getting into the movie itself, basically, Sam Raimi was not prepared for what it would be like to work with a studio. All you need to know really is that Crime Wave was a disaster, and it looked like his career was in serious jeopardy.
Oh boy.
And the reasons behind that are there's so much to talk about that I don't want it to dominate this discussion. So I recommend y'all check out a video from the channel In Praise of Shadows. They do a whole comprehensive video on this because it's a fascinating story. But for this context, what you need to know is that Sam Raimi, his career was in a situation where he needed to be very careful and he needed to hit. Okay, so he decides to make a sequel to Evil Dead, even though some reports say he never considered doing a sequel. Other reports say he had talked about it. He was told to make a movie that plot-wise basically was the first movie again. He worked with Dino De Laurentiis, a big producer of the time, and De Laurentiis wanted this sequel to just be like Evil Dead 1, which is another very common theme in horror movies. You make the sequel, the producers just want a carbon copy of the first movie. But what Sam Raimi does to, get himself excited about this, not just feel like he was doing a retread, is he took a completely different approach tonally. This is a very similar thing with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, is it not?
Extremely similar. Yes, very similar path taken.
But of course, whereas this was, I think, instantly a hit and has only grown in stature, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, I believe, was more, it got like mixed reviews, but most people did not take to it until much later, so they had very different paths there. But yeah, Evil Dead 2, Bruce Campbell comes back, a lot of the same production team comes back. Sam Raimi writes the script with his buddy Scott Spiegel, and they decide to bring a lot of humor, a lot of kind of absurdist humor, a lot of slapstick. He's famously a big fan of the Three Stooges. They decide to make Ash a badass or something like, as opposed to the everyman he was. Now he has these one-liners. He has a chainsaw for a hand. All that. It's a very different animal, despite the fact that we're working from the same skeleton. So, President CM, I'm here to ask you, what is your opinion on Evil Dead 2?
Well, I hope everybody has their pitchforks and their torches ready because I am not a fan of Evil Dead 2.
That's me doing. Yeah.
I have appreciation for some of the things that they do. But I think I'll bring up the film that you just brought up a moment ago in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 quite a few times as we go through this, because in my opinion, when I talk about these two movies, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, I have a lot of love for, and I have a lot of appreciation for. They're very similar. They took very similar paths, but for some reason, when I watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, it connects with me. And Evil Dead 2, from the first time I watched it until the time that I rewatched it and rewatched it again, it just doesn't stick with me in the same way. And I don't know what I'm missing that other people love, but yeah, I'm ready for the mob to come after me because I'm not a fan of the movie.
Cancel culture is real, people.
I'm ready for it. Bring it on.
Oh my God. Yeah. So here's the thing. I personally come into the Evil Dead story pretty late. I think I mentioned this on our last episode, but I got into Sam Raimi through Spider-Man and Darkman. I watched the Evil Dead trilogy much later. And by that point, I had basically found the Sam Raimi movies that I not only loved, but like they kind of defined me. You know, they were the ones I held to my heart. The Evil Dead trilogy is not, I'll say this, that's not the relationship I have with these movies, right? I admire them. I'm thoroughly entertained by them. I love them in a way that is very like, it's like a childhood friend versus, you know, a friend you make in your adulthood. It's just different, right?
Right.
Not to knock the friends you make past childhood. It's just, you know, it's always going to feel a little different. So I am not a sensitive guy when it comes to these movies. So it doesn't hurt to like hear somebody say that about Evil Dead 2. I personally think it's a pretty damn good movie for a lot of the reasons I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was a very underrated movie. But you make your case for your hot take, your hottest of takes, right? Evil Dead 2. Most people see it as one of the greatest horror sequels of all time. What can you say is your problem with Evil Dead 2?
I feel as though, so when I go through all three movies, I feel like Evil Dead 1 and the first two Evil Dead films, I compare a lot to the first two Texas Chainsaw Massacre films because I think they're both very similar in the sense of the first movie for both franchises has a lot of this hidden sort of dark comedy throughout it that people don't pay as much attention to. I think Evil Dead is one that they can recognize a little bit more because it's a little bit more on the zany side as opposed to just gritty and dirty and kind of disgusting like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film was. But the second films are very clearly a shift towards more of the comedy side. But for some reason, when I watch Evil Dead 2, that comedy doesn't connect with me like it does in Army of Darkness. I feel like Army of Darkness is much more effective with the comedy that it writes in there. It genuinely makes me laugh. It makes me engaged in the story. Whereas I feel like Evil Dead 2 was very much a retread of, it almost feels to me, whereas Texas Chainsaw Massacre feels like it just takes a different route, but it's more funny, but it's a different story for the second film. I feel like Evil Dead 2 is the same movie with the hilarity turned up, and that hilarity doesn't really connect with me like it does in Army of Darkness. And so to me, it almost feels like somebody saw Evil Dead, was able to get the cast and make a parody of Evil Dead, and that's what was released as the sequel. And it, for some reason, that just doesn't hit with me. It feels like a parody and not a comedic sequel. And while it does have its moments that do make me laugh, and I think there's certain moments where you can really see the brilliance of the direction. It's really, for me, it fails in the writing, and the execution I think is near flawless, but I can't get behind the writing and it's just it doesn't land with me everywhere else.
Okay.
And that's where my hot take kind of comes from.
So let's do a little game here. I'm gonna bring up moments, iconic moments from this movie. You tell me yay or nay. Do you like them or not? Okay.
Okay,
Right. So when Ash chainsaws off his own hand, yay or nay?
that's a yay.
Okay. When an eyeball flies out of one of the deadites and lands in the mouth of that annoying hillbilly chick, yay or nay?
Nay, didn't really land with me.
Okay. Oh, when Ash says groovy.
That does land. I like groovy. I like that.
Okay. All right. All right. So it sounds like you don't hate the core mission of the movie, which is like, let's bring some humor into Evil Dead. Maybe you think, or maybe the problem is they went too overboard, maybe a little too kind of corny.
No, and I think that's where it comes from. I think the big moments in the movie do land okay, and it makes me give the movie a slightly more favorable rating of other films that I'm just not a fan of. When I'm not a fan of a movie, the worst thing that you can do for me is bore me, and that's not what this film does. There's not a single part in the film where I feel bored per se. But if I'm watching something that's supposed to make me laugh and it doesn't make me laugh, that's where I start to kind of that's where it starts to lose me. And I think when that's the core mission of your film, and I don't have a problem at all with the comedic direction, I think it was a good idea. I just don't think there was a way to properly follow the first film in a similar way that we saw in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't think there's a way to properly follow that in a serious tone. If there was, it was something to do much later. But it's the execution of some of that comedy that just didn't work for me. And that's I can see how it does for some people, but like it just the core moments don't bother me. It's more the smaller stuff, and it just kind of builds up to not as favorable of an experience, I guess you could say.
Right. And that's a very even tempered, approach. Like, you're not saying that it's overrated, that it's trash, that it's, you know, you're not being inflammatory, obviously, which is unfortunately the route a lot of people take when they don't like a sequel that other people do like, um, which is one of the most tragic elements of modern discourse. But
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Now here's the thing with this movie. I mean, I'm not. I think it would be very condescending to call it a stepping stone. So I'm going to say that Sam Raimi really perfected his style, and he took that style to projects that I think were just had a more interesting story. I think that's probably the best way for me to say or surmise my own feelings on this, right? Because it's not a movie that I watch so often. I think I actually do prefer Army of Darkness. Spoiler for my own little opinion there, but
All right.
yeah, no, Army of Darkness is fully committed to the act. And Sam Raimi, he had to still make a retread of the first Evil Dead, and that is probably the thing that holds it back for me in terms of my full embrace of it as part of my, you know, part of my what do you call it? Those select few movies that you would take with you to that desert island, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's all like him perfecting his style, and then oh wow, that's he got to take that style and do so many great things with that. Right? Forever grateful. Forever grateful. And I'm thoroughly entertained. So let me go over a few things about this movie that I really like. Uh, you know, First two things: Bruce and Campbell. That guy, like, holy shit. Like, how is he not in every movie? This is the most naturally charismatic. That is the most naturally charismatic man I've probably ever seen.
Completely agree with you. He's just and even in the moments that you don't feel like he's like the greatest actor in the world, you know, where you kind of see like that Zane come out a little too much, it's just you can't help but enjoy it. And you know, it's he's just one of the most likable guys to be on screen. I don't know how he's not like at least a cameo and just everything.
Yeah, and I wonder, he has a cameo in all the Spider-Man movies. And I wonder if Sam Raimi tried to get him a bigger role and it just didn't work out. The studio wasn't going for it. But I think all of those cameos are perfect in each one of those Spider-Man movies. I did hear a rumor that he was supposed to be Mysterio at one point.
I think he's just one of those people that maybe larger Hollywood has kind of pigeonholed him as like the horror guy. I think it's unfair for him. But I don't I mean I can't name that many movies that Bruce Campbell was in as like a core character that wasn't a horror film, whether major or minor,
Which is
or at
weird.
least like had horror overtones.
No, you're right. But his main strength that I see in this movie is that he can play an action hero and he
Hmm.
brilliant with comedy, like all
Yeah,
forms. You know, the physical. He's got great line deliveries. He can somehow play a badass and an oaf, like a doofus.
yes, he's a goofball badass.
Yeah, and I that's an archetype now, and I don't think it was back when they did Evil Dead 2.
I think he's the model.
Probably, probably. I mean, that's what makes him so iconic, right? I mean, people worship at the altar of Bruce Campbell. They're
Understandably so.
Yeah. So he's my main takeaway from this movie, other than Sam Raimi's direction. Like, I mean, you can't. I think we talked about this with the first Evil Dead. His samurai sword is his camera work, and man, the camera work in this movie. Oh, what? Okay, you tell me. What do you think? Did his camera work elevate this movie for you?
It made me enjoy it more, and that's where I think it comes back to like I don't think there was anything wrong with the direction. I think the direction was failed by the things that I don't like. When I'm talking about my personal opinion about the movie, I mean, being a big wrestling fan, I mean, they say there's a term, get all your shit in. He definitely did that with his camera work here.
That's good. Get your shit in.
Yep, get your shit in there. Get all your best moves in there. Get all your best work in there so that everybody can see it. And he went to the camera operator and was like, "Look, buddy, we're gonna go all out here. We're gonna show everybody what we're capable of." And then the camera operator was like, "Well, what about the first Evil Dead? That was fine. That was amazing." And he goes, "Oh, you haven't seen anything yet." He
So
was
now he
ready
has
to
a
show
budget.
everybody.
Yeah,
Yep.
now he has a budget of 3.5 million, which would be closer to 9 million, I think, today. So, no, he has a lot more toys to play with, right?
Yes, he did.
Like in the first Evil Dead, you see the camera rush up to Ash and he screams, it goes into his mouth. Iconic. But this time you see the same thing, and then you see Bruce Campbell being spun around in the air on this rig, and then he lands against the tree and he falls into this fucking muddy ass pond. Poor Bruce Campbell. He must have done something to Sam Raimi. He falls in this muddy pond. It's like there are pockets, there are moments in this movie that are perfect to me, that are brilliance, that shine through. But when I learned that Sam Raimi was literally forced to retread the first movie, that cleared up so many things to me as to why I don't personally um, champion this movie. Because people like, I think they would call this like some kind of core part of their personality.
Right.
Like Evil Dead 2, that really says something about you.
Hmm. No, you're right. Yeah, and every horror group that I've ever been in, where I'm talking to people who are horror fans, it's like there are certain core movies that you have to like if you're a horror fan, and Evil Dead 2 is always on that list, and it really surprised me to see it on that list. But on most people's top horror list, and that I've spoken to personally. And
Mhm.
that's just it speaks to how it affects people and how people resonate with it.
And it's probably because it just changed the game, you know. I mean, there was horror comedy before this. There was An American Werewolf in London, um, which, you know, if we're talking hot takes, I would actually say I kind of prefer that movie's balance of horror comedy. Because when it wants to make me laugh, it makes me laugh, and it wants to scare me, it scares me. And to
Yes.
think of it, I'm never scared in Evil Dead 2. I can't say that I'm ever, you know, I have that feeling of anxiety, of tension, right? The comedy
No,
dominates.
I completely agree. Yeah, it tries to balance it. I feel like in certain points, but it doesn't. I don't feel like it does it enough. Like you said, I did. If there's a part that's supposed to scare me, it didn't.
Mhm. Right. And I don't think Sam Raimi would say that the point of Evil Dead 2 was to scare you. I think he
Right.
would be open with that. But at the same time, it's great to have a multi-dimensional experience like an American Werewolf in London for me. Um, that being said, it's great that with Army of Darkness, he was like, well, why even keep the pretense that we're making a horror movie? Like, let's be honest here. Let's be honest about what we're making. We're making comedy. We're making action adventure. You know, we're making entertainment. He has this one quote where somebody asked him about making Crime Wave, and to me, it's the quote that sums him up as a filmmaker. Somebody asked him, "What were you trying to do with that movie? What was your mission with it?" And he said, "I wanted to make the ultimate picture of entertainment." And that's exactly what he tried to do again with Evil Dead 2, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those. I think he's one of those directors. I think that's extremely honest. You know, when you have so many directors that are sort of pretentious about the movies that they make, when the movies truly aren't what they're being sought out. This is a completely uh, like sort of like terrible comparison when it comes to that. But I don't know if you've ever watched the movies of, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Uwe Boll, who did the terrible House of the Dead movie, and many other terrible movies, is very pretentious about his movies. He's not really honest about what they are, which is truthfully so bad that they could be so bad they're good. But there's a level of pretentiousness there that just doesn't work. And I think Sam Raimi's always been honest about his movies just being a good time, and they're not necessarily. I think that's what makes them masterpieces for people, is that they're a good time, they're unapologetic about it, and they're not making any excuses for the things that some people who are pretentious film critics would go after.
Right. And it's nice that he does receive critical acclaim, that critics appreciate that quality about him. Because sometimes there is that dividing line between critics and audiences with the filmmaker who just wants to entertain.
Yes.
And let me be clear, right? I'm not saying that Sam Raimi doesn't have any narrative depth, right? Or most emotional depth. I think
Right.
I said this last time. Spider-Man 2, it has lessons that I still hold to this day. Like I think about Spider-Man 2 during rough periods of my life to kind of guide me, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that sounds silly, but you know, I mean, I think any movie that touches you or
Yeah.
it does so for a reason.
Yeah. It doesn't sound silly at all to me, man. I have movies that I follow exactly the same way that you just described it. So I can definitely see it.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that he doesn't have depth, far from it. I'm saying that he doesn't prioritize his own ego over the entertainment value and the audience's experience, which is a crucial difference.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of a great person to compare him with. I mean, there are so many genre filmmakers that are, I think this is the controversy behind the whole elevated horror movement. Like, are you saying that just because a horror movie is designed to scare you, that it is inherently less artistic than, you know, than one of these kind of think piece movies, right? I don't think so.
No, not at all. It bothers me so much. And not to say that I don't enjoy those movies either. And I think you might fall into the same boat, whereas like a lot of those movies are good. It's just when people kind of twist that and make it into something where movies that are either designed to scare you or even like horror comedies are lesser than because of it. And it's just, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think I don't agree with that at all.
Oh, same, same. And I think that whole elevated horror kind of movement received so much backlash because people see that. I think people feel the same way because you look at a movie like Evil Dead 2, and I know it's neither of our favorite movies, but I think we can both respect the work, the effort, and the thought that was put into it. And at the same time, it is such a beast of entertainment that does not treat you, the audience, as like there are filmmakers who have this style of if you don't like my movie, you're dumb. Right?
Yes.
Right. Sam Raimi is like, if you didn't like my movie, then I failed. I failed you. I'm sorry.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I like that. I like that. I like the way you worded that. That's a good point.
Yeah, I think somebody, probably some other person said that, and I'm plagiarizing here on the
We'll
record.
give that other person the credit, and ultimately, but that's a really good way of putting it. There are really some directors that just make you think like, oh, well, like my movies are elevated, and even if they don't make you feel like that, then the fans of those movies will make you feel like that, and it just like I'm not lesser than because I enjoy a movie that doesn't necessarily, and I think that's where my appreciation for Evil Dead 2 comes in because I do appreciate it and I appreciate what it did the same way that I appreciate Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 or similar films that kind of blend this level of like grotesque horror and even though Evil Dead 2 doesn't have it in a scary way, there are plenty of films afterwards that follow that same model of we're going to throw a lot of things in here that make you laugh, but we're going to play. You know, we're gonna put a lot of the horror stuff in there too. We're gonna make sure you remember it's still a horror film at its core, and I think I appreciate that a lot because it's not one of those movies that I have to sit down and think about for 3 days before I give a rating for, or just sit there and mull over because there's so many side stories or things that weren't revealed that you can just mull over after you watch the movie. It's you sit down, you watch it, you enjoy it. If it sticks with you and lands with you, then you think about it afterwards for that reason because it entertained you. But if it doesn't, then that's the last that you need to deal with it. It's not something that's going to haunt you for 6 days after you watch it. You're going to have fun. You're going to be entertained while you watch it, and that was the goal of making the movie. And you can't really fault somebody for succeeding at doing what they set out to succeed to do.
Now, in the interest of fairness to President CM, let me bring up some things that I personally don't like about this movie. They had to reshoot basically the entirety of the first Evil Dead and condense it into just 10 minutes of new footage because they could not get the rights to include footage from the original Evil Dead. Yeah, now I don't know why we needed a recap at all. It's Evil Dead 2. I assume if you're seeing this, you saw Evil Dead 1. Plus, Evil Dead 1 is not the most complicated sort of a sort of plot to summarize. I think it would be very easy to catch people up. So what you have is the first 10 minutes for anyone who's seen the original is just very tedious, right? It's actually a very slow start for me. The movie doesn't get good until Ash starts spinning around in the air like that on that great shot. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so because, like, honestly, and I hate to I feel like I bring up these movies every single time I'm on this podcast. So I apologize to the listeners that have to keep hearing me bring this up, but I feel like there was ways to get around that. Like if you want to do a quick recap at the beginning, I don't think it has to be as long as they did it for this film. But my perfect example would be how Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 starts, where it's just a dark screen and you hear what happened at the end of the last movie, and that takes us right into the new one. It reminds you of what happened very, very quickly. It doesn't show any footage. You just hear what happens, but immediately, if you've seen the first film, you know what happened. You're caught back up, and you're ready to go. And not that they could have taken inspiration for that for Evil Dead 2, because it would be many, many years later that film would be made. But I just think it was extremely tedious, and it definitely it did not help my overall feelings towards the movie. It didn't help my enjoyment.
Yeah, I guess I'm just still confused by the decision to, like, I mean, isn't there an opening sequence where we get voiceover explaining all of this? Like, why couldn't that opening narration just recap the events of the first movie as well? So it's not that big of a deal. But I remember the first time I watched this, I was actually kind of baffled because honestly, Bruce Campbell's acting in those first 10 minutes are really bad. I know I just talked about how much I love the dude, but it just seemed like he was annoyed that they had to reshoot it and he could not wait to get it over with.
He looked ready to be done.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'm not saying that's literally what happened. I'm saying that's how it comes across. Um, Bruce, please, I love you. Don't shut off the podcast. Everyone else,
Keep listening. Keep listening. We still love you.
like and subscribe, Bruce.
We know you're here. Do it.
Yeah, so my other big thing I would say is these side characters who come in, almost all of them are just so useless, but so loud. You know what I mean?
Oh, that is literally the perfect. So useless yet so loud. I love that. I'm gonna use that when I talk about this in the future. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, so interesting kind of fact. The hillbilly girl, the woman, was intended to be played by Holly Hunter, who was Sam Raimi's roommate at the time.
No way. That would have been so awesome.
Yeah, but the studio didn't buy the idea of her being, what's the politically correct term? Um, right, that kind of girl,
Kind of people I live around these days. I'll tell you that. I don't gotta say nothing else, but I gotta talk in the accent a little bit. You know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows. Everybody listen knows what I'm talking about.
So it must have been annoying for Holly Hunter at the time to lose a role, but then she got to break through, and I think she's probably glad that she is not associated with this role because, when you talk about women in horror films and all the problematic history there, this isn't the worst example, but it's an example for sure. Because this fucking woman, just God, why? And then her boyfriend or whoever that fucking guy is, like, at some point in the movie, she runs off. He's just yelling her fucking name. There are all these close-ups of his teeth, his messed up yellow teeth, screaming her name, and we're just waiting in agony for him to get killed. You brought up Rob Zombie. I mean, there you go.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is like I don't think it would have been as bad as like like let's say the actors that and I won't name their names because I don't want your podcast to get sued just like all the studios had, but the two very large Hollywood actors that appeared in Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, I don't think it would have been that bad as far as like them trying to sue to get their faces off the movie if she would have appeared in it. But I don't know if it would have been that great for her career, especially as she was trying to break through. I think it was probably better that she wasn't in the movie, even though the movie is not necessarily a staple of embarrassment. It would not have been the best start, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
wish she had been in the movie because Holly Hunter could have really turned that character into something a lot more interesting. She could have been a real spitfire. Um,
She would have brought more to it. I can agree with that.
yeah, not like she would have saved it. Just yeah, it just would have definitely would have been more interesting to look back on. It would
I
have felt
agree.
worth it to see a young Holly Hunter in a role like this. But as it is, it's just there's nothing that this character adds to the movie. So that is unfortunate. I kind of like the daughter of the archaeologist who kind of becomes Ash's kind of side chick. Um, Nobody ever talks about this character, like ever. Like it's one of the most talked about films ever, but I don't think anyone could tell you even the name of this character, which I find interesting.
I don't even think I could. Uh, and I just recently watched it again. No, I don't. I don't think I can. Oh, oh.
Yeah,
No, I
but
don't think I can remember.
and you're not alone. You're not alone at all. But it's interesting because she is very different than your tip. Like I feel the obvious choice would have been to get some kind of buxom, really, beautiful kind of bimbo that you might see in a typical movie. But she is, she comes across as someone who can really hold her own. Um, she and Ash really work as a team, and I think the actress and Bruce Campbell definitely have a chemistry there. But at the end of the day, this is the Bruce Campbell show, and if you're not Bruce Campbell, you're playing second fiddle. That's just the nature of this movie, I think.
I completely agree. They might as well have called it Evil Dead 2 Bruce Campbell's Revenge because he is the star of the show. It's pretty much just I don't care how many other actors or actresses you put around him in this movie. There are two stars of this show, and it's the camera work and Bruce Campbell. And those are the only two things that you, in my opinion, I don't know how anybody could really like take in anything else to the fullest extent of maybe it was intended to because Bruce just I mean he's what else can you say about the guy? He steals the show.
Yeah, and that continues into um, Army of Darkness, where even though that's a much bigger cast with some veteran actors that I recognize, still he just steals the show. So for a while, I was thinking, damn, Bruce Campbell is just going to. Are we ever going to get another memorable character aside from Bruce Campbell throughout the Evil Dead franchise? And then Ash versus Evil Dead thankfully introduced a lot of characters that I really enjoy and I really love.
Yeah, and I think it makes me sad to look back on it because I think there's a lot of movies that especially were coming out around the time that Evil Dead 2 was or maybe a little bit after that like I mean it just makes me more sad that Bruce wasn't a bigger deal than he was. I get he's not your traditional looking like action star or your traditional looking movie star, but it's not like he's like a bad looking guy. It's not like he's a terrible actor. I think he's made for parts in these. I think he could have been a huge thing in horror, in either horror comedies or action comedies, with much bigger budgets and much more showmanship involved in the making of the movies. And it just even though I'm not a fan of the movie, I'm very much a fan of Bruce Campbell, and it just makes me sad every time I watch all three of these films that he wasn't more.
Now, let's be clear too. We don't need to weep for Bruce Campbell. He has done very well for the
No, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, he's a legend and he's recognized as such. I wish more mainstream audiences and more mainstream movie fans knew Bruce Campbell. Past, Bruce Campbell. Oh, you mean the guy from the Evil Dead movies? Okay, I got you. Yeah, Ash and the Evil Dead. I know that. I wish he was more than that for mainstream audiences, but for horror fans, I mean, they will pay his salary till the day that he dies, and I think he's very lucky for that. I think he was. I think he earned it for sure. But it just makes me sad that he wasn't more of a mainstream star than he could have been.
Yeah, it makes me sad when I hear stories about Sam Raimi trying to cast him in big roles and the studio just wouldn't let him. It's bizarre.
Very bizarre. They must not have watched the other movies.
Right. Well, he was supposed to be Darkman. Um, Sam Raimi intended for Bruce to be Darkman, and the studio again. And to be fair, I do kind of get that decision because Darkman is a much more tragic character. So I could see the studio not seeing how goofy Bruce Campbell, the groovy guy, would play that role. I'm not saying that Bruce Campbell couldn't have done it, but okay, let's say that definitely was outside of his type that he had established for himself. But still, you would think
Yeah.
that, like, yeah, Sam Raimi kept trying to cast him in roles that just were so obviously meant for Bruce Campbell, and it just wouldn't work out. It was weird.
Yeah, and we'll see if another actor comes along that kind of fits that mold. But it's strange because there's nobody that's really been like Bruce Campbell since. And I do want to say too, real quick, before we move on to the next point, at the time of this recording of this podcast, I want to congratulate you on your Darkman article. I was able to read through that, so that I enjoyed that. Congrats on that.
Thank you. Yes, I had the privilege of writing an article for Dread Central about Darkman. It was really good timing because Sam Raimi's out in the news, so I've been revisiting all of his films. And yeah, if you want to check that out, just go to Dread Central, look up Darkman, and give it a read. I had a lot of fun writing it.
It's worth the read, everybody. Go find it.
And it's just so interesting. Again, the career of Sam Raimi. I mean, because right after this movie, he did Darkman, which was a big budget or bigger budget, not anything like an MCU movie, but it was like a 20-25 million dollar movie with Universal. So he actually took a really big leap from Evil Dead 2 to Darkman. And it worked out there. It did become a hit, and it gave him the momentum to become the huge name that he is.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because when you talk about his filmography, like I don't think a lot of mainstream fans could see how he could make a jump from this film to Darkman. I think when you watch the movies, you can definitely see hints of Sam Raimi in there, and we discussed that on the last podcast when we talked about this. We talked a little bit about the Darkman and how it was received and everything, but I don't think a mainstream person who's never heard of maybe they've seen his movies, but they've never heard of him, and they don't pay attention to directors much. And then you say, oh, well, the same guy who did Evil Dead 2 not only did Darkman, but he also did Spider-Man, and they'd be like, well, okay, well, I can kind of see some of it, but like, how do you make that quick of a leap? And I think it just shows how technically, and I don't mean technically in a hypothetical way, I mean like how technically proficient he is as a director, and that's why he is where he is today. And he's got a huge movie coming out. I think it just came out actually.
Yeah,
in the MCU. So
yeah, it came out a few days ago. I've not seen it yet, but I will. It's the first MCU movie I will have seen in theaters in a good while, and it's all for him. It's all for Sam.
All for you, Raimi. You hear that? You're definitely watching. You're definitely listening. It's all for you.
He's one of my 5 followers. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
It's him, Bruce,
Rob Zombie, and then me.
Hey, Rob, if you're not following this, you better, man. I mean, if I'm gonna die on the hill for you, I expect a like and a subscribe, Rob.
We'll find out. I'm looking for you now.
No, but Sam Raimi, I mean, there's so much to be said about him. I could do a whole retrospective on his career, but then I would be ripping off the Blank Check podcast. They're doing a retrospective on his career. But my point is, there's very few directors that I could actually imagine sitting down and watching their whole filmography. Sam Raimi, he's one of them. And that's not even because I think every single thing he does is a masterpiece. I just think his style and his voice shines through everything, to the point where even the times he had lackluster material to work with, it kind of has a parasocial quality to it, which is weird for a director who doesn't act. But I do feel like I am hanging out with Sam,
Yeah, and I would actually be really interested in like if he ever gave the opportunity for, like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Omaze like foundation, but they'll do things where, like, if you donate, you get the chance to win something. I think it'd be really cool if Sam Raimi did an Omaze contest where people donate and could potentially watch a film with him and just have him kind of break it down with you and just have a good time watching it. I feel like not only is watching the film feel like you're having a great time with Sam Raimi, but I think actually being able to watch it with him and talk to him about it and just have a good time, I think it would just it could completely change your perspective on a movie that if maybe you don't like, or I think it could completely enhance your viewing experience to be able to do that. He's just everything's so fun, and I think he should definitely consider that. Since he's listening, let's just tell him he should absolutely do it. But you're right. I mean, like watching a movie feels like you're already having a good time with him, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and it's also knowing the context that he and his friends just made a movie and that they stayed so close throughout their whole careers. I mean, think about it, right? Sam Raimi keeps working with Bruce Campbell. He goes
Yep.
out of his way to make sure Bruce Campbell stays involved in his projects. I mean, that's touching. It's a beautiful thing.
It is, and it makes me like it's an inspiration too to like filmmakers. You know, like you and I, who you more so than I at this point, but like for sure, because you've made a very good film. But I think it's an inspiration to people like us who want to get into the film industry, and it helps you not only realize like it's something you can go do with your friends, and it's something that you can make happen with people who you know you're close to, or that you want to make this happen with, but you it also helps you remember like don't depart
Oh my
too
god!
far
Oh my
from
god!
who
Oh my
you
god!
are. You all right?
Did you hear that? Something just went off on one of my browsers. I apologize.
No, I was gonna say that sounded like something was coming to attack you.
Yeah, that was aggressive. That was aggressive.
It was.
Holy shit. Do you want to step back and just keep saying what you were saying, but just without the interruption?
Well, it's just it's actually I kind of forgot. I don't remember what I was saying. Oh my god, that was so funny.
I
Uh,
think you summed it up all very, very well. And it's a theme that we'll keep coming back to, because it is the most present thing that I love about these movies is the vibe I get from them
yes,
and the history behind
he's
them. So
he's the
yeah,
vibe king.
vibe king. Oh my god, that's so perfect.
He is. He's the vibe king. He's the vibe king of filmmaking.
So if you're listening, Sam, which I know you are, just send Connor a shout out for saying that wonderful, wonderful thing about you. Right? I think you owe it to him right now.
I got you, Sam Raimi. I got you.
Oh man. So, all right, Evil Dead 2, we had a very interesting discussion about it. I'm curious, would you recommend it to somebody? Like somebody is asking you, "Hey, I'm getting into horror. I hear a lot of great things about Evil Dead 2. Should I watch it?"
Um, I think my answer depends on who. If it's the example you just gave, honestly, um, no. But I wouldn't put that as a bad thing. Because honestly, there are movies that I absolutely adore. In fact, some of my favorite horror films that I would not recommend to somebody that's just getting into horror movies.
Hmm.
I think it's one of those movies that once you're in the world and once you have a good understanding of Sam Raimi's direction in horror films, and even some other horror films that are similar, like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and takes a tonal change in the film franchise, I think that's where you can start to appreciate it. But I would not, if somebody's just getting into horror, maybe they're not too well versed in it, they're not too used to horror films as a whole, they haven't seen too many of them. It is not a movie that I would throw out and recommend. And I don't want anybody to get too upset about that, because one of my favorite horror movies, several of them, I would not recommend to new horror fans. But I certainly would not jump at saying, "Hey, you're just getting into horror, go watch Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2." Maybe just Evil Dead would make that list, and then Army of Darkness, I think, would also make that list, but not Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, well, I would say you better watch Darkman first, and then you can watch whatever the hell you want.
I like that answer.
Um, yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed that discussion. Again, it's a little different than the other discussions you might have heard about Evil Dead 2, but that's what we do. We break new ground here on this podcast. We challenge convention, and we promote just bold, fresh ideas. That's all we
Free
do here.
thinking. Free thinking. This is the Free Thinking Movie Podcast.
Free thinkers. Hashtag free thinkers.
Hashtag free thinkers.
So, with that being said, guys, I hope you all joined for our episode about Army of Darkness, which I think will play out much differently because I am very affectionate for that movie. I can go on and on about how much I like that movie.
And I have a great time with it too. I think it's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, so it's all going to culminate, baby. It's all going to end in a spectacular event, the likes of which have not been seen in podcasting history. So get your front row tickets. And by that, I mean like and subscribe and follow on all your podcast listening platforms. And then join us next time, right?
Join us next time. We're gonna finish it out. We're gonna finish it out strong. And I'm ready for it.
All right. This is Gabe Tice from All Nighter Discussions, signing out.